name's Philip Alexander. I'm the finance editor of The Banker magazine, and I'm here in the Financial Times headquarters today with Brian Kaplan, the editor of The Banker magazine, to talk about the top 1,000 global bank rankings. Brian, these have been around for about 39 years now. Is this going to be a particularly significant year, do you think, in terms of the rankings and what they show for our readers?
I think they are, yes. I mean, obviously, it's been a tumultuous time in banking over the past year to 18 months, and the bankers' rankings have always set out to capture the relative strengths of different banks around the world. But what we've seen over the last year or so is some very high-profile names having all kinds of difficulty and having to recapitalise themselves, often with government support. And I think more than ever, readers are going to be interested and fascinated by what the rankings show.
As you say, there's a lot of demand at the moment for more information on the banks and in particular on levels of bank capital. Has the Banker adapted its own methodology to try and reflect that and give readers more detailed information on the situation at each bank?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly went through a great deal of discussion and thought about whether our approach to the rankings was correct and how we needed to adapt it. What we've done previously is we've always looked at Tier 1 capital as a measure of bank strength. And we've always thought that was the right way to do it, because, I mean, if you look at things like assets, you can't really be sure what the quality of assets are. We went out again and talked to leading bankers and analysts in the light of the crisis, and we still think that is the right measure to look at, Tier 1 capital. But we're going to add some additional information this time. We're also going to look at what is known as Common Equity Tier 1, which means just the equity part of Tier 1, because obviously one of the controversial areas in banking over the last year or two has been what other kinds of instruments and kind of hybrid instruments that have been used in core Tier 1. So we're going to add some additional information in that respect, and we're also going to ask additional questions about the quality of assets and see if we can get a better picture for what kinds of assets banks have and how their quality looks under the IAS 39 regulations.
Right, I guess one of the other areas of focus has been not only the capital of the banks, but their funding, their sources of funding, and how that can cope under stress in the kind of liquidity conditions that we've seen. Is the Banker looking more closely as well at liquidity ratios?
Yeah, we've got a question about liquidity ratios and about ratios of loans to deposits and cash held as a percentage of total deposits, and all this information is in there. We're unable to present all the information in the Top 1000 issue, clearly because we have a vast data bank of information. So we actually have, as well as the published version of the Top 1000, we have a database with about 5,000 banks in it, and we have a lot of this information which is available to people to subscribe separately to the data bank, and we have it arranged in such a way that you can manipulate the data and move it around and rank banks by different kinds of methods. But definitely, I mean, liquidity is going to be a big issue going forward, and we've tried to provide as much information about that as possible.
Presumably the scope of that database also allows people to consider things like how the different regions around the world have fared and the way in which, I mean, I imagine you've already seen some changes in recent years over the balance of capital and the strength of banks in different regions, that the sort of traditional markets of the US and Western Europe are not necessarily the strongest banking sectors anymore.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see that. Certainly we're going to see, I think, as the continuation basically of a trend that's already been going on, which is we've seen Chinese banks and Brazilian banks and other banks from big emerging markets rising up the ranking, and I think we're going to see that even more so this year. But it may not be as dramatic as you expect, because in some cases, of course, you've seen banks recapitalised by the government, and while we may have some additional tables to show this, in the main ranking we don't actually distinguish between capital that is provided by the state and capital that is provided by the markets. Because when you think about it, I mean, the capital is good in terms of supporting the bank wherever it comes from. So it may be that a bank like Royal Bank of Scotland, on that measure, doesn't suffer quite as badly as we might expect. But definitely we've seen a change in the bank rankings reflecting the rise of the emerging markets, which has been going on for some years, and I expect that to continue.